On today's show, the Hawks have played 60 games this season, and it's not gone super well, but there's plenty to discuss in Hawks land, and I'm joined once again by my friend Glen Willis of ATL and 29 fame for part one of a two-part episode, and part one is coming to you right now.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1666 of Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you on a Sunday evening into Monday here in early March. And today's show is brought to you by the folks at FanDuel Sportsbook. And right now, if you're a new customer with FanDuel, get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet at FanDuel. And the place to go is FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Also, I should tell you at the top of the podcast, make us your first listen each and every day on Locked On Hawks podcast. Find us at Apple Podcasts and Spotify, as well as YouTube and anywhere you get your podcasts. I'm joined on today's episode by my friend Glen Willis of ATL and 29 for part one of two. Part two should be available in your feed of choice right now. We get into all things Hawks for about an hour and 5 minutes total. Hour 10 minutes total across two episodes. From the way they've been playing recently without Trae Young to challenges in the future, challenges in the present, the rest of the season, Kobe Bufkin, the young guys, the philosophies, all that stuff is going to be in these two conversations, and certainly worth listening to part one right now and also part two after listening to this podcast. Thanks for listening to the show as always. Subscribe to the podcast, and here we go. Myself and Glen Willis and part one. I am joined once again by my friend Glen Willis of ATL and 29 fame. Glen, welcome back to the podcast. And for those listening, this is actually false start. This is actually Glen and I recorded for the second time. Behind the curtain we go. Glen, how are you?
Technology doesn't always cooperate. Yeah, I'm good. As we were kind of talking beforehand, it's been a while since we've done this. And it feels like, to me, like when I think back, it feels like it's been 5 different little kind of mini Hawk seasons with different situations. They're missing a certain player for a while before Hunter came back, and then Jalen missed, and so it just feels like it's kind of been different iterations of the season along the way. Even though results have kind of been the same, along the way. But yeah, no, I'm good. It's good to have the chance to kind of catch up with you on all things Hawks. Appreciate you having me.
No, it's my pleasure. It's been a while since I've had you on, which is certainly my fault. It's not like Glen was turning me down. I listen to ATL and 29 every episode. You are frequent with Kevin in season, and I'm enjoying that and don't want to put too much on your plate. I know you also have other things going on, but it was a good time to kind of catch up a little bit after the Hawks played the afternoon game on Saturday, kind of bridging the gap between, they're not traveling, which is weird in itself. I was talking to people behind the scenes with the Hawks, and no one can find a situation where they've ever been in the same city for 6 whole days other than at home during the season. It's like they're actually in New York longer right now than they are during a playoff series, because it's usually 2-2, 1-1-1. You're not really in that city for more than maybe 3 or 4 days, and they're in New York for 6 days right now. Anyway, so it's a little bit strange. They've also played 60 games exactly right now, which is a nice nice even number. And like you said, it's been a lot of different ebbs and flows. They had a 4-game winning streak about a month ago, got everybody excited. Then, the injuries that you referenced, Trae goes down. They lose the 2 games badly before the All-Star break that frustrated everybody. Onyeka's out too. They have a little blip where they win the first 2 games without Trae, and then the last 2 games were not great in Brooklyn. So it has been a season for sure, Glen. It's been a basketball season. That's kind of the way that I would describe things. Not a lot of solace to be taken, but especially when you're on, but always on this podcast, we try to get into the weeds a little bit, give you the nuance and all of that. So I'll just ask this, like, where's your head at with this team right now? Because certainly it is kind of a lot of false starts, and clearly the number one story right now is how they're operating without Trae, and even Onyeka, who we should at least talk about, because I think a lot of it's like Trae is out, which obviously is a huge deal, but they're also missing arguably their best center as well at the moment. So what's on your mind right now? How are you feeling about this team?
Yeah, this season has been frustrating for Hawks fans for sure. I know I expected them to do better. I think I predicted them to finish 5th in the East. Safe to say that's not going to happen. No. And there's a way to talk about what's going on big picture. There's a way to talk about what's going on, immediately. Big picture, they're trying to take this thing in a different direction with the same roster they had last year, basically minus JC for the most part. And that takes time, right? And I thought they would look more like they looked in that, playing game against Miami, that, having some competitive portions of that Boston series, and that's not really, they haven't sustained any play for more than a week and a half. I think maybe 2 or 3 times we've seen where they've kind of been maybe at that level, and otherwise it's just been really up and down. And that stretch in December absolutely killed them when they were basically just like playing basically the worst basketball in the league for about 2.5 weeks. It felt like,
Yeah, close to it.
And I mean, I know Washington and Charlotte and maybe I shouldn't mention Charlotte because the Hawks can't beat them. That seems like, but but for that stretch of play, it was about as bad as I think you've seen the season. And then there have been other times where they kind of put a lot together and look competitive. It feels like it was 3 years ago. I remember the first month of the season feeling like, okay, even when they're down 15 points, they're sticking to process, they're fighting hard, they're competing. And it really, I mean, I don't want to sit here and make excuses for them. That's not what I'm doing. But the NBA season is a grind, and when you're not getting positive results, it's harder to kind of stay in that mode and such. And then the other adversity that's kind of come along. And so, big picture, I still feel like I understand what they're trying to do. I understand the direction that they're trying to go. I understand that the roster is not constructed perfectly for kind of where they want to go. But here more recently, the 2 wins, I know, it's, people out there who are hashtag better without Trae, enjoyed those 2 games. That doesn't quite make sense to me. But we've all talked about it. The guard play of the opposing teams, especially offensively, was terrible, made the defensive task for the Hawks easier. These last 2 games, they went up against a team that can throw a lot of length at you. And that is one of the matchup kind of scenarios that's the worst, for the Hawks, because they just don't, even without Trae, right? They don't have as much size when they go up against a team that can, put switchable defensive lineups on the floor and all that stuff. So even though Trae is out, it still feels like game to game, matchup to matchup, is a lot of the same variables are in play. Trae can overcome some things that the team without him can't. But it still feels like the variables that are most impactful to their opportunity to win the game are still kind of the same to me.
Yeah, I think we're on the same page there. And I was just looking at this actually prepping for this conversation, and I wasn't looking for this exact thing, but I realized the last 24 games, so almost half the season so far, the Hawks have not won and lost back-to-back games. They've had these pockets of 2 or 3 game winning streaks, followed by 2 or 3 game losing streaks. I mean, literally, I won't do the entire thing for you. Back to mid-January, it's 2 losses, 3 wins, 4 losses, 4 wins, 2 losses, 2 wins, 3 losses, 2 wins, and then 2 losses. That's literally what it's been for 24 games. It's almost hard to do that. Like it's like they're designing a lab right now to make everybody infuriated. But no, it's right, and we won't do the whole thing on the offense without Trae. All that stuff. That's obviously the number one storyline in some ways, but we'll dig into that a little bit and just talk about like what they can be, because like we'll probably save it for the end of this conversation, but they are still in the play-in race. They're still right now the 10 seed. They're still, I don't know if they're favored anymore after these 2 games. All the projection systems still are not really factoring in that Trae's not there, and neither is Onyeka, so we'll see. But they're still in the mix, and I know there's a segment of the fan base that doesn't want to hear that at all. They'd rather just talk about Ron Holland or something at this point, exactly. But then there's the other side. There's the other side of things where it's like, hey, the Hawks can make the postseason, Trae can come back, and they're a threat again. So we'll kind of talk about both those things along the way. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. You can get buckets right now with your first bet at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, if you are a new customer, get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet at FanDuel. That's $150 in your pocket if your bet wins. Bet on all of your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and much more. The FanDuel Sportsbook app is also super easy to use. They have everything you're looking for across the sports betting space, from over-unders to money blinds, player props, future bets, and much more. The app is safe, it's secure, and they cover the entire range of sports as well. They have the WNBA, the NBA, college basketball, NFL, college football, golf, MLB, tennis, soccer, auto racing, horse racing, boxing, MMA, and much more. They also have all kinds of angles on the Hawks. That includes the full slate of game offerings when the Hawks are in action, plus future bets, player props, and more. And now is an awesome time to sign up with the folks at FanDuel Sportsbook, and the place to go is FanDuel.com/lockedon. One more time, that's FanDuel.com/lockedon, and shoot your shot with FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NBA.
Yeah, it's funny because people ask me, I understand.
Yeah.
Like, what do you think about this draft prospect? I'm like, I don't do draft prospects until April. Like, I literally 0 minutes, 0 seconds.
I
on
do more than
draft
that, but I'm
prospects
not caught up yet. I have to say, I mean, so we're recording this on Sunday evening. The Hawks, the Skyhawks, College Park played the G League Ignite team today, and they have 2 potential first round picks that were playing for them. And I was kind of like, hey, PSA to Hawks fans, watch these 2 guys. But even then, like, they're kind of the only prospects in the G League, so it's an interesting thing there. And you're watching as much for AJ Griffin as you are for the G League prospects. So
I know. So somebody will tweet at me asking me, I'm like, someone could just like make up a prospect name, and that's what I would not know. That's where I am. Like, I literally
especially
don't
this
spend
year,
any time on it.
Especially this year, like, I know that you don't, because we talked about this before, but I would bet you in the past you would have probably heard of more guys than you have in this cycle, because this cycle is pretty famously not the best at the top. And we'll save that conversation for later. But we will do a little bit at the top here about like the offense in particular without Trae. So let's get this out of the way now. I've been sharing the stats and getting some pushback for sharing the stats, and I'm not trying to pick on it. It's just that the Hawks have clearly not been the same offense without Trae. That should be pretty obvious. It's not like a controversial stance. You take their best player off the team, especially on offense, and they're going to get worse. And yeah, the defense got better in the first 2 games. In theory, and this is someone who I think Trae's very good, the defense probably should be better. If you just took Trae off the roster and you're playing bigger and you're playing Kobe Bufkin and DJ's playing point guard, you should be better defensively. But, all that said, what have you seen? Like, we'll put all the narrative stuff to the side. How have they changed? How have they operated? We kind of know the broad strokes, like obviously Murray's now the high usage guy, etc. But what have you sort of taken away from the offense in this stretch? Again, I'll just say this one time. They're also playing without Okongwu, and Okongwu is their best offensive center. So that is part of this too. Even if Trae is the bigger part of it, I think it gets sort of cast aside sometimes that they're also missing one of their top 6 guys in addition to Trae.
Yeah, the Okongwu absence is significant too. It is easy to forget about when Trae's missing, because Trae has that much presence, on the team. So that's understandable. For me, as they came back from the break, it looks like Quinn and staff expected to see more switching, and so they're running much more intentional stuff around switching. Like, I thought the best part of the second game versus Brooklyn was the first quarter, when DeJounte was playing through his teammates as Brooklyn would switch. But we think about what it takes to kind of, beat a switch, right? So like Sadiq has done pretty good work, he has to be on the baseline side to attack a smaller defender. But he's still, I don't know, if I looked it up, I'd guess he's in the 55th percentile on ISO, like statistically speaking.
Yeah.
DeJounte is like 95th percentile, but if we broke that out between when he's facing a bigger defender on him after a switch versus not, it's different. It's different with Trae on and off, all that sort of stuff. And even Jalen, I think Jalen is, somewhere in the 60th percentile range. And so when I think about kind of what it's going to require offensively for this team to be able to not just kind of attack drop, or, deal with hedges, blitzes, whatever kind of form of aggressive pick and roll defense, this team has got to be able to handle switching. And you saw with Brooklyn, big lineups of big wings, a bunch of big wing size guys in those lineups. And the Hawks just had trouble, kind of doing much, with those switches. And Hunter is, one of their, it's kind of funny because Hunter is likes to function in ISO versus a smaller defender, but he's still not like one of the top. He's not ever going to be, I think, like top, the 75th percentile or better statistically speaking. Even though his game is well suited for that, Sadiq is kind of forced into that role, and he's physical with smaller defenders and those sorts of things. But the thing that it screams out to me is like Jalen's got to develop the ability to do that. Right, Jalen has to be the one. I love him in the short roll when they're running middle pick and roll, all that sort of stuff. But there's 2 things. You go look at Jalen's stats in transition; they're not as strong as you'd expect them to be, right? And I think a lot of that is we see a lot of the times he's not as aggressive. Like, there's a smaller defender in between him and the rim, just go attack the front of the rim, and that instinct is not there yet, right? So, to me, so much of the path of the Hawks having the counters to the things that they are going to run into against bigger defenses, better defenses, is in that switching. And a lot of that is dependent upon Jalen continuing to grow areas of his game where he's, I think, average right now, results-wise, but his tools suggest he can do so much more. And I know we're going to talk later on about kind of the rest of the season. I think that has to be developmentally a priority the rest of this year, is to let Jalen play in isolation and give Jalen a lot of coaching around being more aggressive in the open court, because that's really where a lot of the offense has to come. As much as I admire Sadiq's willingness to step into a role that's not perfect for him offensively and do that, and with what Hunter can do in that space, Jalen has to be the one that develops the ability to excel in that phase, and it's got a ways to go there.
Yeah, I was going to ask you this at some point too, so we could just get into it now a little bit. You know, these two games in Brooklyn where you're right. I mean, I was probably guilty of making it too simple about how the Nets are not a great defense, because they're not, but they are kind of well suited personnel wise to stopping this current Hawks team, because they can switch. They can play a bunch of wings together. They're not like they're only small they really play is Dennis Schroeder, who's a pretty pesky defender. He's not like incredible, but he'll get into you. He's willing to do that, and they have size everywhere else. But Jalen had two games that were not awful, but he was not a huge factor in either one of them. And I think that, you know, it's too reductive to be like, okay, he has to play great every game without Trae. But it is true that like he becomes the clear second option in the way they run their offense when Trae's not there. DeJounte is still going to be the one carrying the most usage. That's just going to happen. But to your point, Jalen's got to be part of that. And something I've been saying broadly even since Trae went down is like, look, I'm not saying they have to tank. They're not going to tank organizationally. I can tell you that right now. They have not done that. I think everybody can see watching these last four games. They're trying to win still. But I think, and it fits well with what you just said, that the big picture priority should be future facing. And they might not think that what you just said, they might not think that kind of not necessarily force feeding, but making sure that Jalen has these opportunities, they might not believe is the best possible way to win the game that night. It's two different kind of things there. But if you're the staff, I think it would be smart to do what you said and kind of make it, put your guys out, and especially Jalen as clearly the highest upside player they have for the future, have him be in these situations, especially because they don't have Trae. It's like, okay, Jalen, we want you to do this, and this. And, you know, when DeJounte's off the court, it becomes Jalen's the number one option, et cetera, et cetera. How do you want to sort of do that? And, you know, it's kind of part of the same thing, but I was also going to ask you, like, how just the offense being different just inherently without Trae and Onyeka, less space, all that stuff, how that also negatively affects everybody. I mean everybody on the roster. Not having Trae makes life harder for every single player on the Hawks roster. That includes DeJounte. Now, DeJounte's numbers will go up because his usage is going to go up. That's already happened. He's going to take more shots. I'm not saying otherwise, but defenses are now loading to him in the way that they do not when Trae's on the court. Jalen, same thing. Sadiq, DeAndre, the centers, everyone's life is harder, and it's kind of interesting to kind of put those two things together, because on one hand, Jalen's looks and the attention he's getting from the defense is going to make it actually harder, but you also want him to do more, and that's this really difficult needle to thread for a team that is also, again, trying to win basketball games.
Yeah, they're for sure going to try to win the rest of the way, right?
They are. It's not even close, by the way. Like, right. Just people ask. I'm sure people ask you this all the time. I could see maybe a situation in like April, like at the very, very end of the year, if they're out of the play-in already, I could see them maybe doing the Dallas thing and not pushing to the end. But as long as they're in it, they're not pulling the plug. It's not happening.
Yeah, and it's funny. It's like if you think about what Quinn is trying to accomplish, like his word is habits, right? How do you accomplish the installation and the commitment and the progress with principles and habits and all those things if you're not trying to be competitive and not trying to win? That's hard to do as a coach. That said, I understand fans thinking, you know, big picture might be better for us just to optimize our draft picks. So I'm not going to laugh. I'm going to laugh at that suggestion.
No, not at all. Right? I've often said that. Like I get it. If I was just a fan, I might be with them. I mean, I can see both sides, but I certainly understand that the 10 seed in the play-in is not exactly the sexiest goal in the world to be shooting for. And that's what
especially since that's where they've been. This will be like the third season in a row that they're.
It's different if you're the Kings forever and you're terrible, and it's like, okay, we have a chance at the postseason for the first time in 15 years. The Hawks have been in the playoffs more often than not for quite. I mean, they had a little lull in between pre-Trae, but even then, like they're kind of. I think fans are sick of being in the play, and I don't mind. I don't blame you for that either.
Same. Yeah. I agree. Yeah. I totally understand all of that. Right. But I do think if you're trying to kind of move the organization, I don't, we throw the word culture around too much, but like to me, I'll use Quinn's words, principles, habits, et cetera, et cetera.
Hawks DNA.
Yeah. There you go. That's the Landry one. Right. So,
yes.
And so I do think it's hard to do that without like going out and trying to win every game, which is kind of where they are right now. And you mentioned like harder without Trae, like things like I may put Bogey at the top of the list of like who is most impacted by that. It's interesting because when you watch Trae and Trae has multiple shooters on with him, the way he leverages that spacing is very different from what DeJounte is super aggressive, and he has to be his best. He has to be really, really aggressive, right? But he is looking to take advantage of that space and get to his pull up, attack the space in the middle. If he has an average on ball defender or less or below average on ball defender, it's very hard to keep him out of the middle, especially if like a Bay plus Bogey are on or Hunter plus one of those, two of those three are on. DeJounte really does kind of feast in the middle, except when a team like Brooklyn is switching a big wing onto him. He finds it much harder to kind of get to that. With Trae, if you kind of give him that space, he'll try to get to his floater and he'll try to get to a pull up, but he's really going to try to help generate a shot at the rim as much as he can, or a wide open three. And DeJounte just doesn't distribute the ball like Trae does. That's not a criticism. Trae is whatever top 5, whatever number you want to pick. Like in terms of his ability to create in that phase and in that way, he's on a very short list of guys currently who have that capability. DeJounte is a good player. He's just a different player, and it's going to look different when he's being afforded space from 2 or more shooters on the floor than it does with Trae. It's going to result in more DeJounte trying to attack space individually, because that's what he is. That's what he does. That's what he's good at. But if one wants to say that doesn't necessarily lead to maximizing everyone around him, then there's some truth in that. Even if I don't want to go out of my way to criticize DeJounte. Players do what they're good at. Players lean into their skills and their strengths, and that's what DeJounte does.
Today's show is brought to you by PrizePicks and Demons and Goblins, the newest and most exciting way to play at PrizePicks. Scores work with Red Demons or Green Goblins give you different payouts at PrizePicks. You can win up to 100 times the money, and with just as little as 4 correct picks, you can turn $10 into $1,000 at PrizePicks. If you want to play alongside some of PrizePicks' most favorite players like Rapper Meat Mill or comedian Andrew Schultz, also find them under the Community Plays under the Promos tab of the app to view some entries from some of the biggest names in the PrizePicks community each and every week. And they also have injury insurance at PrizePicks. Your entries can stay in play even if one of your players happens to get injured. And it's really simple to play at PrizePicks as well. I can make my picks and submit my entry in just 1 minute or less. And they have quick withdrawals at PrizePicks, easy gameplay, and enormous selection of players and stat types. That's what makes PrizePicks the #1 daily fantasy sports app in the market. I've been playing there for quite some time now. I really enjoy diving into all of the options and all the numbers each and every day. And it's a great place to do that. And the place to go is prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use code LockedOnNBA when you get there for a first-time deposit match up to $100. One more time, that's prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use code LockedOnNBA when you get there. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy with PrizePicks. Yeah, I think it's definitely. I think there's been I don't want to speak into the void, but there's this thought that I'm like super low on DeJounte, and it's really not true. It's just that I just kind of identify what he's good and what he's not that great at. Like I think if you line up all of the starting level point guards in the league, he's not exactly an above average passer for a point guard. Like he's a fine passer. He makes simple reads, all that stuff. But I think it's more. I made this point last night. It's more like if all you do is watch Trae Young play point guard for 5 years, and then you watch DeJounte play point guard, that drop off as a playmaker it's massive. It just is. DeJounte does a lot of things well. Like obviously he can cook people off the dribble. He can get to his spots, the pull ups. If he's making a jumper, he's impossible to stop. It really is true. If DeJounte's making his mid ranger, he can have 20 points in the quarter. We've seen it many, many times. Yep. It's just a different way of doing it. And also to that point, I think DeJounte has done no favors without Okongwu too. DeJounte and Clint have no chemistry, zero. They never have. And they don't really operate a lot together because it's usually Trae and Clint kind of doing their thing. And Clint, in his current state, we don't have to spend a lot of time on this, but Clint is not the same guy he used to be by any means, even this year, coming off the injury. So like having Clint on the court, and also having DeJounte and Clint not having chemistry makes it harder for him, makes it harder for everybody involved. There's nuance to all of this stuff, but that's what I'm saying. It's not just Trae. It's also Okongwu not being there. I did want to ask you schematically. You mentioned a little bit about just like being prepared to see switches. I think we actually saw, like you said, the first quarter of the game on Saturday. They had that full day off, which I think our friend Bob Rathman pointed that out on the broadcast. I was like, hey, that's true. Teams staffs are not used to having a full day off in the same city to prepare for the next game in a rematch. It's like that's almost a playoff series thing. So they were kind of prepared for that. But what have you not seen? Like, what do you want to see schematically, knowing that they're not going to have Trae for a while longer and Onyeka for probably a while longer too? What can they do? Like, what would you like to see them do differently that you have not seen so far through 4 games?
Yeah, it's such a hard question to answer with the group that they have now, because they are a little bit fixed in kind of the things that they can do. I mean, unless they want to like run Bogey more like off ball screens, which is not a feature in Quinn's offense typically, right?
Yeah, and
they have that.
Yeah,
they have that one ATO where they dribble the ball to the right 3-point break and they bring him across. They'll do it on like ATOs and
plays.
Kind of special plays and stuff like that. But otherwise, Quinn wants ball movement. He wants to have the ball beat the defense kind of to where they're going to. And you'll see, like, when he's not calling a specific play, whether it's, 1 out, 2 out, or, whatever play, it's flow. You'll hear him say all the time, flow. And that flow is what he's looking for, is the ball movement and the connectivity, and having the ball beat the defense, kind of to a certain spot. And Trae is like just a dynamic passer. And like, you grab another, like, I don't know, really good point guard in the league that's more of a scorer, like, I don't know, like Jamal Murray. Like, if you watch Trae play point guard and then like you went from Trae to Jamal Murray is awesome. Like, one of my favorite players in the league. But like, there's like almost any player at that level, and Jamal Murray's better than DeJounte. I'm just trying to say that even a really high level guard, there's going to be that drop off, And so when it comes to Quinn wanting them to run flow and have the ball really, really move, without Trae, any team that goes to Trae to no Trae, it's going to be a lot harder to kind of generate kind of those principles that Quinn wants. And so for me, it's not so much around something schematically I want to see that's different. I think they need to lean into Jalen, right? Whether that's 4 or 5 pick and roll in the middle, snug or higher, or whether that's just, switch beaters and things like that. But when you watch Jalen attack a switch, he kind of wants to get to the middle, like 9 feet right in front of the rim, and shoot that turnaround. He's not as comfortable on the baseline with the bank shot. He's more inconsistent when he's working closer on the baseline. And for me, it's like, there's nothing that I want them to lean into schematically that I think is going to really move the needle. I don't think there's anything there. I'm not an NBA coach, so maybe there's something that there's something they know that I don't know.
Well, that's why I'm asking you, because you're better at that stuff than I am. But I kind of have the same takeaway. Like, there's not a whole lot, and I'm sure they will do little stuff different. There's no question about that. But like, there's not like a magic elixir at this level. It's a talent issue on some level. They don't have the best talent offensively. I won't reveal who said this to me, but somebody who I think is smart brought up that maybe they want to bring Bogey off the bench again, and just kind of maybe get he and DeJounte away from each other. Not necessarily because they don't work together, but Bogey is, number one, been in the bench role a lot and has operated in the bench role this year. There isn't an obvious option to start in his place. They could go to Garrison or whatever. That's kind of, again, back to the talent issue.
Or Kobe. Some fans will say Kobe.
Maybe you could say no. And that's, honestly, given what I said before about leaning into the future, I wouldn't mind. And I've said this. I think I would be supportive of them playing Kobe 25 minutes a game right now, and have him play all the DeJounte minutes, all the DeJounte on the bench minutes, and then also play him 10 minutes a game with him and just get that experience. Because in the future, they drafted Kobe to be able to play point guard and with the two. That's part of the appeal of the Kobe experience. So, the other benefit is that when Kobe's on without DeJounte, Bogey would really, really help Kobe. And that's part of the theory too. And also, I'm not sure if you saw this or have heard it, but I thought Quinn was more demonstrative than usual after the first loss when they got blown out in Brooklyn on Thursday, about how they just didn't break the paint. Like, he was he said it several times in his post game, and he's not the most schematically open with the media. Sometimes he doesn't want to tell you what he thinks on that kind of stuff. But it was post game. He was kind of raw. They got blown out, and I'll be the first to say, and I'm sure you'd echo this, it's not easy. It's not exactly an easy thing to do to break the paint. It's hard to get there. Teams don't want to let you get there. But that's something that it's been banging around in my mind too, that since he said it so forcefully, I was watching for it on Saturday, and they just didn't do it that often. Like DeJounte, when he gets downhill, it looks great. Like there's a reason I always praise when DeJounte's able to get all the way to the rim, because it's usually good stuff happens when he's able to get not just to his 12-foot range, but all the way downhill to the rim. That's the same for Jalen. It's the same for even guys like Sadiq and DeAndre. All the way to the rim really helps. But that's something that Trae is the guy that does that the most on the roster. Like when Quinn says we have to break the paint, guy number one on that list is Trae. He does that all the time, and he gets spots that guys can get to. So I don't know if that like brings up anything in your mind about what's something they could do, but it just struck me that Quinn was so playing with it, like, hey, we just didn't break the paint at all tonight, and it's like, well, it's hard. It's hard to do that, and I don't know how they fix that either. I mean, Kobe did it a little bit too, like he's capable of it, but they don't have. I mean, maybe it's Jalen. Like to bring it full circle, maybe it is Jalen that they're just get asked to get in the middle of the paint and just go from there, and it leads to sprays and kickouts and something our mutual friend Kevin said recently, and he's right about this. Is the 3-point volume is way down without Trae, and that's not just Trae's passing. It's also that's number one on the list probably, but it's that you're not collapsing defenses. Teams are not having to react to you. And normally three-pointers that are not off the dribble are created by the defense collapsing and you're kicking out and spraying out passes. They don't have that going on right now a lot.
Yeah, and it's funny because Quinn said that after the game, and Brian Oliver on the telecast was telling us the whole game they're not breaking the paint, right?
Yep.
That's the number one issue today. And I thought Brian Oliver does a great job.
He does very well. Shouts to Biel, by the way, who also, and not everybody does this in that role especially, but even when he's doing pre and post game, he goes to press conferences and asks questions, which a lot of guys do not do in the analyst role. Yep. Brian's like pre-game, post-game, like, hey, what did you see here? What did you see here? That's a little thing, but it's like, that's how you get to know what's going on. And I'm sure they also have their own meetings beyond. Like they obviously have access that we don't have to Quinn and the staff behind the scenes on travel and on planes and that stuff. But I always appreciate Brian, like being really, really, not necessarily what's the word? He's very curious about what's going on, which I appreciate.
Yeah, and it's a little thing that's kind of a big thing, right? Because like you said, it's a difference when other folks in that role maybe don't always do that. And I enjoy, Bob's the best of the business. Legend. And while there's a lot of entertainment value to what his and Neek's chemistry, even if you prefer a different style of color comment, whatever, their chemistry is super entertaining. But like when Brian's in there, like it's nice you get a different just kind of presentation of what's going on, and I enjoy it a ton. So they are having a harder time, right? And like I said, I think leaning into Jalen comes with tolerating some mixed results. It's not going to be good right off the bat, right? But those reps are valuable to him. And maybe with him, it needs to start with, I don't know if you can adjust your rotation to where he's doing that against the other team's second unit more than against their first unit. Like the first, I don't know, I mean, there's only 22 games left. So the first, I don't know, maybe even the rest of the way that needs to be playing. Because if you throw, like, the next 4 defensive teams they play are 11th or better when I checked yesterday in defensive rating, and have a lot of size on their own, things like that. So, so it's going to be interesting to see if Quinn does lead into that. But like Brooklyn was loading up for switches up the floor, and you saw like DeJounte in the first quarter of the game on Sunday was hitting Sadiq, letting Sadiq work on the baseline side. I think they miss Onyeka's ability to kind of duck in, which is and create pressure from the weak side in the ways that he does. That the way that Clint just doesn't have the lift and the agility kind of right now to offer that. The other part of that is, if you're playing Jalen a lot at the 5, you may be limiting your ability to kind of put him in the offensive role you want to. So that's tricky there. Like, how much Bruno do you want with Jalen at the 4 versus Jalen at the 5? And so there are some hard choices for the Hawks to make. I mean, on paper, like for a video game, you're like, I'm just playing 40 minutes, playing 20 minutes of center, 20 minutes powerful. That's not conducive to kind of probably what you really, really want to. But I think they do have to kind of thread the needle. I think, because we accept they're going to try to win games, I think they have to kind of lean into building up some capabilities and leaning into reps that are going to maybe not serve their best interest short term in terms of wins and losses, but kind of set themselves up for having some of that to carry into the offseason as an input into what you want, for example, Jalen's developmental objectives to be once the season is over.
All right, that is all for part 1 of this 2-part episode with myself and Glen Willis. Part 2 should be available in your podcast feed of choice, and it should be there right now. So go ahead right now if you want to and listen to that show. Click on that one, download it, etc., and enjoy the rest of the conversation. Please subscribe to the podcast on Apple and Spotify and YouTube. Follow the show on Twitter/X at Locked On Hawks. Follow me there as well at BT Rowland. I also run about the Hawks on a regular basis at patreon.com/BT Rowland. And with all that said, listen to part 2, and we'll see you all next time.